morning. Okay, for your homework last night, you read several articles, 6 articles that I posted in Google Classroom to correspond with our discussion of what is literature, who gets to decide, should we change the literary canon, should we adapt it, abolish it, or preserve it as is. You read the articles last night, you have your notes in front of you, and so I'm going to have you talk in your groups about those questions. Some of the questions that I have here in Google Classroom for you. And so each group should have a Chromebook, and whoever has the Chromebook, log into Google Classroom, to our second period class, and then as we finish the group discussions, you will post your responses here under these questions that I have posted. So for example, the first one is windows and mirrors. Remember yesterday in class, we talked about how some proponents say that literature should provide windows or mirrors. Mirrors to reflect our own experiences and our own traditions and culture, and then windows so that we can look into unfamiliar environments and cultures that we want to learn more about. So talk in your group about the works that you've read over the last few years, the ones you've been assigned in high school and ones you've read on your own. Which were mirrors, which were windows, and explain. After you work in your groups, I'll call us back together and we will have a class discussion over your responses. Any questions about that so far? Okay, so talk about some of the interesting things you found in the articles you read last night, and you can use these questions posted in Google Classroom to guide your discussion. I will be coming around and talking to each group and answering your questions and hearing your thoughts. Okay, get to work. Which one are we tackling first over here?
Oh, we're just kind of going through our notes.
Okay, that's fine. And if there's anything else that you think would be interesting to talk about as a group, or just save it for when we talk as a class, something else that you thought of that I didn't bring up, I'd love to hear that.
So do you have to choose one, or can we explain how
you can
it could be
explain
a combination?
A combination. Right. Yeah. If you think all 3 are important.
Hamlet for window.
Hamlet? Yeah.
Do you relate to Hamlet at all?
You can relate to Hamlet.
You murder your stepfather?
No.
If you had to murder anyone?
The namesake window.
Window?
Yes, this year's all windows. Mice and Men window.
What about some of the elements in Hamlet, though? Obviously not murdering, but what about not knowing what's real, and can you trust yourself? Remember, Hamlet's so ambivalent, and he wants proof. He wants definitive proof.
Can something be a window and a mirror?
Yeah.
A mirror?
So you guys, when you finish typing your response, submit it. So I can see here that Dylan's group, they finished the question about windows and mirrors. So just submit. Remember, 1 person per group. Type your group members' names on the first response, but the rest of them you don't need to, because I'll remember who your groups were then. Okay, guys, let's regroup a little bit as a class, and then I'll give you some more time if you haven't finished with the questions. We can talk through some of these, and then I'll look at your responses and give you some more time to summarize. So, windows and mirrors. I know a few of you have already responded to this one. All right, let's see if you agree with Dylan's group. So we have the namesake would be a window for some of us, right? So it was a window for me because I was not as familiar with the Indian immigrant experience, but then also a mirror because as I've shared some of my own experiences of moving away from family in another state, I could relate to Gogol. So it was a little bit of a mirror and a window. How could Into the Wild be a mirror?
Maybe just the idea of freedom, and just some people might have that idea they want to just get out there and just I don't know, that might be an idea that a lot of people can relate to.
Okay.
However, it could really not be an idea that people relate to. So.
Okay. And then how would it be a window?
It could be a window for people who aren't bold and adventurous and go out there and just want to do things spontaneously, because ultimately not the best things happen at the very end. But it might give somebody an escape into being spontaneous.
Okay. Anna?
I was going to say it's kind of the difference between a mirror, because I feel like everyone at least once in their life fully considers wandering off into the woods and never returning. And the window aspect of it would be that he actually did that, so you get to see realistically what that would look like.
Okay. Students are usually divided. They either think Chris McCandless is such a hero and he's an individual and he does his own thing, very much like Thoreau or Emerson, or they think he's selfish and narcissistic, and how could he have done that? So camps are usually pretty divided. How many of you think he was brave?
I don't think he's a hero. I think he's just a guy.
Okay. So brave, disillusioned, you can relate to or understand why he did what he did. And then how many of you think that he was just narcissistic and selfish? Okay. All right. Very interesting. I would love some time to study how your view of Chris McCandless and your views of Holden Caulfield, if you read Catcher in the Rye, let's say if you don't like Holden, do you also dislike Chris McCandless, or can you say, no, I absolutely relate to Holden, but I don't get Chris McCandless? For some reason, those books, I always come back to comparisons between those characters. Okay, anything else for windows and mirrors? What about over here?
So for windows, we read a book in 10th grade, which actually it was interesting to me. It's called A Long Way Gone. It was a memoir. Because I actually lived in different countries, so I was able to experience different cultures. And A Long Way Gone, a lot of literary devices were used, and they were very effective in a way. And how the author actually structured his life back in Africa, and then he came to the United States. It was also the main topic was how he was a boy soldier, and how they used different drugs to actually
to control
them. Yeah. So it was very interesting. And then he went from a very miserable life, came to the United States, became an author, went to a good college, and was able to find opportunity in this country. So it was very interesting.
Okay, that's a nice transition to talk about how literature should be studied then. Should we study it for complexity? Should we look at sentence structure, word choice, diction, all that? Or should we look at it from a moral perspective? Or should we just read books that are interesting? What do you think, Grant? From a moral perspective. Okay. So if we can't take some sort of message away that makes us more empathetic or more compassionate, then there's no point in reading it, even if it's well written?
I think for the most part, yes, depending on the book.
Okay.
It needs to be dependent on what the book's about.
Okay. Anna?
Heavily on teen engagement. At the time you're young, when you first start school, they always talk about fostering a love of reading in children that will sort of carry on through the rest of their lives. And I think by the time you get to high school, they force you to read things that you'd really rather not be reading, that are either difficult to understand or just plain dull. And that can really put, or even middle school really, that can really put a lot of people off from reading, and they could miss things, experiences, ideas they might not otherwise have considered if they just drop reading altogether.
Okay. What are some books you've read, and please say there are a few, books you've read in high school that you do consider engaging?
Actually, most of the books this year I really liked. I really liked The Namesake. Really liked The Willow Side minus the child rape part. I really like, we read Fahrenheit 451, and that was 10th grade, 9th grade?
Ninth, usually.
9th grade? Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people really didn't like that book, but I really like that book, and I think if you're going to do a dystopian novel, that's the way to do it. But, it's really hard to, struggle through a lot of Shakespearean works. Some of them are good and they're interesting. I actually liked Hamlet. It wasn't too difficult to understand as some can be. But I think that can put a lot of people off because they're like, oh no, we're going to read Hamlet or we're going to read Shakespeare because no one wants to read Old English. But I think there are some of his works that are still not too difficult to decipher and kind of bring just interesting ideas.
Okay, Surya?
I think the structure of the book can definitely contribute to its message. If you have a book that's poorly structured and poor working, it's not really going to get across a really strong message. So I think in order to have a strong message, you have to have a structurally sound book. If you're reading a book that's written by a 5-year-old and it's literally just them saying something, it's going to have less of a deeper meaning and less of an impact on you, as opposed to a book with lots of subtleties and lots of relatable examples. So when we read The Namesake, the whole theme of a divide or a cross between cultures that's a lot more meaningful and had like a much deeper impact and had more like stronger like moral arguments than someone just stating that these cultural divides like do exist, like someone presenting with statistics. And I think that in order to have a book with strong morality and with strong engagement, you have to have that structure. It's not an either or, it's you have to have one to have the other.
Okay. Arusha, your hand was up too.
Yeah, I have to agree with Surya, and I slightly disagree on the engagement thing, just because I remember reading Brave New World and I didn't like it the first time I read it, and the second time I read it I had something more to learn, knowing that I wouldn't like the storyline of the book. I could appreciate its structure and how complex it was, and I do think that it's so important to be able to kind of step back from the story of the book and just see how the author has written, so you don't necessarily need to take away maybe completely the moral message, but there are messages in Brave New World that I think are applicable to our world now if you take away from the fact that the storyline is slightly disturbing.
Okay.
Books, but we're exposed to so many different types of books. Like, Brave New World is not a book I would have picked up, but I had to read it, and I found out that that is my favorite type of book. I read books like that all the time. I do Android Stream and Electric Sheep. I love it so much. But I wouldn't have found that out on my own. But at the same time, like, there's not a way to like find something everyone's gonna like. So I think there is something to, reading a vast amount, like as much as we can with, as in depth as we can go in that time period. Because, it does, like Grant was saying, it does expose us to like things that we wouldn't have found before. And, even if it doesn't, if one book doesn't work for every student, it works for some. And I think that's, kind of the value.
Okay. Grant?
And I think that's just part of it. I think as a teacher, like introducing a kid to something that they thought they didn't like that they do like is like good, like that's a good casualty, I guess, because then some kid maybe next book they'll like that one. So it's just part of the process of people getting to know themselves.
Right.
And it's just
Surya?
I think it varies from work to work. So like for like more contemporary language, a more contemporary setting, those are books that we can go through a bit faster because it's easier for us to like connect to them and understand them. And also books with like a more engaging storyline, it's easier to just form a connection with them. And I know like personally, going from reading The Namesake to reading Hamlet, it was kind of like like reading completely different things. And so reading Hamlet over and over and over again, like to study for the test, that helped a lot with just disconnecting myself from the story of Hamlet and looking at the messages and like the uses of characters not as actual people, like in The Namesake, which is like a work of it actually happens, like there are actual people there. But with Hamlet, when you start looking at the characters as literary devices as opposed to just like real like living, breathing people, I think it allowed like greater understanding of Shakespeare's message and of the overall plot. So I think if we look at it from like a contemporary versus like an analytical lens, we can differentiate works between them and see how much time we have to spend on them.
Cole?
I also think it's interesting that like there's a lot of books that are like so polarizing. Like Catcher in the Rye, like I know people who really like that book, and then people who hated that book are never going to touch it again. Like I remember when I read it, I really liked it, and then people didn't. I think it's kind of important to teach books that are really like people can love or hate them because it's kind of special that there's like a book that really connects with people and doesn't. It's like I guess that says something about it.
Okay. Arusha?
And the whole thing about pushing through books, what I do think last year that we didn't get to do that much was talk about the books we read. We read Gatsby and we briefly talked about it, and we read Scarlet Letter and we briefly talked about it, but equaling that wasn't, I guess, the goal of that class. And in this class we've gotten to talk a little bit more about it, which I think makes the books more enjoyable, because talking with other people you see things that you might not have noticed yourself when you're reading the book, which I think that's also really special. And what Cole said about the fact that there is a book so polarizing, when you see someone else's perspective and you see their argument for the other side, I think that makes you more open to it.
Okay. We talked yesterday, we briefly revisited the conversation we had first week of school. What makes a work be considered to have literary merit? Anybody remember any of those criteria? Universality. So can I get something out of this book, whether I grew up in Alabama or India or anywhere in between? Can I get something out of it, whether I'm 41 or whether I'm 17? Does it stand the test of time? What else? Something Arushi touched on, the reading Brave New World the second time. So can a work be read multiple times and have new insights? Are there multiple levels? Or, some of the beach reads, the books that we might read just when we don't want to really think, we just want to escape, those don't challenge you. And if you pick them up again and read it through, you might not get anything else out of it. But Heart of Darkness, I get something out of it every time I read it. The works that we've read this year, I have. So what makes a work literature with a capital L, and who gets to decide, I guess, is the question. Who should get to decide? Professors, teachers, critics? Surya?
I think it's both the role of the person reading the books to decide whether the work has literary merit to them, and it's also, it's like sounds like really abstract, but like the collective unconscious, like people, everyone relates to it, and everyone has that certain draw to it. There's no way to like quantify universality of a book. Like you can say that a lot of people can like have a strong connection to its message, but unless like a large portion of society can do that, you can't really like emphatically claim that a work has literary merit. I don't think it is something that you should be claiming. I think it should be like a discussion and a continued discussion, because if a message of a book starts to fall out and it's not so relatable, then it doesn't have that same universality. So we should keep like questioning whether works of literature still have that universality of their message. I would just still keep like discussing and debating the message that these books do have.
Okay. Abdul?
It really depends on if you can relate to the book or not. So like each author has their own message, their own themes. They structure the thoughts based on their themes. They want to like give their audience a message, and I mean sometimes you haven't went through the experiences that this author has went through. So I mean, yeah, you may feel that. You can feel that.
Okay. Arushi?
I also think that it's like important to touch on the classics. That's also another thing. We can't exactly, I guess, we can't find a lot of similarities between us and someone who lived 100 years ago. But reading works of literature now that are present in our day that came out recently, you can see how those authors have pulled things from classics and have found themes that are the same, but have applied them to lives that we can find relatable. And so I still think it's important to read works like Hamlet, because you can see Hamlet's messages apparent in literature now.
Okay. Dylan?
Yeah, so I think like finding literature with a capital L, like defining it. One of the articles we read last night, it like talked about how literature like represents like cultures and like peoples and like what's going on at the time, like what's popular, like and all that. So I think that like literature, like for it to be like great and for it to be literature, it has to like represent the people and represent what's going on at the time. Because again, what Arushi said, we can also look back in the past and see what happened back then and then relate it to now.
Okay. There's an argument, Jenny mentioned enjoying dystopian works, right? Brave New World. There are critics today who say, well, not necessarily critics, proponents, who say, why are teachers still teaching dystopian works like 1984, that was written in 1948, like Fahrenheit 451, that was written in 1954, like Brave New World, which was written 1920, something like that, a long time ago, the beginning of the 20th century. So the proponents say, why are teachers still teaching those classic dystopian works when there are more modern ones like, what, Divergent, Maze Runner, Hunger Games. Yeah, all that whole genre that's out now that's so popular that you can read the book at Barnes & Noble and then go watch the movie. Why are we still teaching 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World? Anna?
Okay, so I'm on the team old dystopian novels, because old dystopian novels look to the now more so than modern dystopian novels. Modern dystopian novels, the whole idea of a dystopian novel is like it's set in a post-apocalyptic future kind of thing. So the future for someone in 1948 would be our here modern times. The future for someone, in 2014 isn't 2018 or 2019. It's, many, many years in the future. So they're the whole, like, the themes that they use, in both senses of the word, or both works, still apply to the modern times, but I just feel that, like, the old ones sort of hold a mirror to what
society is like today, and some of them got it really right, and some of them got it really wrong. But either way, I just think it's more applicable now than the ones set in the future, or our future.
Okay, cool.
And a lot of the like modern dystopian books don't really focus on the dystopian society. They more focus on like romance or just like characters. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the older ones focus more on like the actual society and the issues at hand. And that's why they're more applicable now, because like 1984 is government surveillance. We can talk about that now instead of like the Hunger Games. We're not going to have an in-depth analysis about PETA and Katniss. We can't talk about that. That's not important to our society.
Prisha.
Kind of like what Cole was saying, I think all the dystopian like novels now, they're more like commercial and focus on like other aspects rather than like the actual theme and moralities that we're trying to, or like a message that we're trying to get from the novel. Because I don't really think there's a message to the Hunger Games. I just think it's like, you know, some like commercial thing. Whereas like 1984, you can kind of get a message from it, and like other like dystopian novels written like a long time ago, there's more like themes to it, I guess. So that kind of adds to the literary merit.
Okay, Jenny.
Right. I would argue that modern dystopian works do not have universality, and I will argue this specifically because it is targeted to teenagers. If you look at the characters, most all of the main characters are going to be teenagers. Katniss, Everdeen, Tristan, Divergent, other one. But it's like, if you look for them, you'll find them in the teen fiction section of your bookstore. Like, they're not for everyone. I mean, certainly adults can relate to like ideas, but it's hard to relate to like a teenager, whereas a teenager reading it is like, oh yeah, this is so me. Like, rock on. I don't know. Sorry. But basically, it's like, it's not universal. It's written for teenagers and people who are like still in that idea phase, which is like Cole was saying. There's more of a focus on like romance and like other ideas. Where like if this situation were actually happening, there wouldn't be a lot of time for these things, you know? All right. Grant.
One of the articles we read talked about how Fahrenheit 451's dystopian society, where books have been banned, is completely relatable to how our leaders in America seek to control the media we consume.
Okay.
So I think even though they're different mediums, like books and media, they're still relatable to each other. And I think a lot of times the people in current day modern books, they try too much to relate to people, if you know what I'm saying. Like they try too hard, and it just comes across as kind of ignorant.
Okay. Think about how crazy everyone probably thought Bradbury was. You know, he writes in Fahrenheit 451 about people walking around with, he called them seashells in their ears. Well, what do we do that's just like that?
Bluetooth.
Yeah, the Bluetooth, or the, what do you call them, the AirPods, the AirPods. Yeah. Anna?
So I was going to say, I actually kind of disagree with one of the things that was said. I do think that some of the modern dystopian novels have a message. I just think that message is lost in the things that make them a commercial success. So like Cole was saying, that whole romance plot in the Hunger Games, like the whole idea of the Hunger Games is that it's like government-sponsored child murder, right? And so there's the whole message that goes along with that. But I think, you know, with it being a commercial success and being made into movies and just sort of used more for profit, I think the message was lost somewhere along the way, and we started focusing on the less important things.
Okay. Arushi?
And I think, like you said, it's so popular now, but like for Bradbury, people must have thought he was crazy. Then it wasn't popular. It was the unpopular book. But we can appreciate it because we can see the similarities now. Hunger Games being so popular now, everyone loving it, it becomes almost like, oh, it couldn't possibly be of literary merit. Everyone loves it. There's nothing polarizing or interesting about it. Everyone knows what's going to happen.
Abdul?
Hitting on that point, like Shakespeare back then, I mean, that's what I read. It wasn't really appreciated in his days, but then in our days, like in modern days, we actually appreciate it as literary merit. I mean, I kind of consider, like, everyone is interested in, like, the Hunger Games, for example, but we never know, like, maybe in the future, maybe 100 years, it might be considered literary merit.
Okay, so that's a nice transition to that question that I posed yesterday. Instead of reading classics, should we be looking at books like So this is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and it has won the Nobel or the Pulitzer, and a passage from it even showed up on an AP Lit exam. So should we be focusing on works like this? This was published 2013. There are several other bestsellers that I expect we'll see on the AP Lit exam. Probably not this year, but in the next few years. Should we preserve the canon, keep teaching what's always been taught? Should we adapt it to include more works like this, or should we abolish it altogether? Grant.
I think it's a mixture of these things to get both perspectives.
Arishi?
And I think even this year, Namesake is fairly new compared to Hamlet, obviously, but it was still important to read both pieces. And so, again, adapting, I guess, the canon so that it's still including pieces from now, but we're still reading classics so we can draw parallels and we can come to conclusions to see how literature is adapted.
Okay. Lara?
Yeah, like Arishi said, there was also an article that we had to read last night about the classics, and it also said how like a basic understanding of classic texts is kind of required for an education, and they are like referenced a lot so you can understand allusions, but it also talks about including more diversity and then books that we can more relate to. So kind of adapting it to include like important classics like Hamlet, then also including books like The Namesake that people can more relate to.
Cool.
I think that it should be, like Grant said, like a mix, because if you look at just last year, we read Into the Wild and The Catcher in the Rye, which are two books that, although they're different, you can draw a lot of similarities. And if you mix them, then it's easier to like draw similarities between the classics and the new books. And you can look at what made something old become like literary merit, and then things that are new, like what actually makes new books literary merit. Because like it's hard to look at the now and realize what's going to be popular later and what people are going to look at later, because like when Catcher in the Rye came out, I don't think anyone was like instantly talking about how in 2019 people were going to talk about it.
Okay. Anna?
So yeah, actually, in a similar vein as something that Cole, Rushi, and Abdul said, the whole idea of like what makes literary merit, I don't think books are immediately like published and immediately become of literary merit. I think it takes a while, and it takes multiple people reading it, finding different little nuances and different perspectives. And so that's what pretty much what Cole was saying, that like in the future something may be considered of literary merit, even if it's not considered literary merit now, but that doesn't mean you still shouldn't read it now, even if it's not of literary merit. And then something that Ginny was saying, how do we determine what should stay and what should go? I think we need to be honest with ourselves and say what really stood the test of time, what really still maintains its universality. Like obviously Lord of the Flies was written a long time ago, but I think, like what Ginny was saying, I think it still has a message and ideas that are really, truly relevant to today's society.
Okay. Anything else that came up in your reading last night that you want to talk about? Any of those articles from the New York Times or Jen?
Okay. This is just something that occurred to me as I was reading. I think people take like, what is literature? I think they take that question too personally sometimes. Like everyone kind of equates like literature with the best of the best, the cream of the crop. It is a good book, that means everyone likes it, it's a good book. I mean, even so, not everyone likes pieces of literature.
Right.
But I mean, it's like some restaurants, not some, but very few restaurants have a Michelin star. And I mean, you go there and you know you're going to get good food. Does that mean that your mom and pop restaurant where they do home cooking isn't good? No. It just means they don't have a Michelin star. It doesn't mean that it's not good. It's not a personal question. It's, does it meet these very specific standards? And if it does, it takes time to get there too. It's not, I read it and I realized it was a literary merit, so it should be. But you know, if it really, really is a literary merit, it'll get there. But you know, some books just aren't, and they're still good books. It just means they're not literary merit.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, then I will let you finish with your groups, posting your responses in Google Classroom, and then I will check your responses from that. Okay.